One lawsuit, one inheritance, one family betrayal. I never thought the day would come when my own mother would stand beside her new husband, against me trying to steal the company my father built with his blood, sweat, and tears. They thought I'd be weak, that grief had made me vulnerable. They thought wrong. What they didn't know was that my name was already on the papers before their game even began. My father had taught me well in restoration. As in life, the foundation determines everything, and he'd made sure mine was unshakable. My name is Grace Miller, and I'm 34 years old. As I sit in my corner office at North Star Technologies in downtown Denver, watching the Rocky Mountains pierce the morning sky, I can still smell the sawdust and varnish that defined my childhood. Those scents belonged to my father, Richard Miller, and they were woven into every memory I had of him. Dad wasn't just a contractor. He was an artist who happened to work in timber and stone. His company, Miller Restoration Group, had become the premier restoration firm in the western United States, specializing in bringing historic buildings back to their former glory. From the Victorian mansions in San Francisco to the Spanish colonial churches in Santa Fe. Richard Miller's name was synonymous with meticulous craftsmanship and unwavering integrity. I grew up on construction sites, my small hands learning to distinguish between different wood grains before I could properly write my name. While other kids had playgrounds, I had scaffolding and blueprints. Dad would lift me onto his shoulders, pointing out the intricate cornices of a 19th century bank we were restoring, explaining how each crack told a story of time, weather, and human history. "Grace," he'd say, his calloused hand gently guiding mine along a weathered beam. Restoration isn't about making something new. It's about honoring what was, while ensuring it survives for those who come after us. Every nail, every joint, every decision we make becomes part of that building's story. Those lessons shaped more than my understanding of architecture. Dad ran his business the same way he restored buildings, with patience, precision, and an unwavering commitment to doing things right, even when no one was watching. Profit margins never trumped principles in Richard Miller's world. His employees weren't just workers, they were craftsmen, and he treated them accordingly. Many had been with him for decades, their children growing up alongside me on those same construction sites. The software engineering path I eventually chose might have seemed like a departure from Dad's world of physical restoration, but he saw the connection immediately. "You're still building, sweetheart," he told me when I landed my first job. "Just with different tools, and the principles remain the same: attention to detail, structural integrity, and always document everything." That last piece of advice would prove more prophetic than either of us could have imagined. Dad had always been meticulous about planning. His workshop at home, a converted barn that smelled perpetually of cedar and linseed oil, contained not just his tools but filing cabinets full of detailed records, contracts, permits, photographs of every project at every stage. He approached his estate planning with the same thoroughness, spending months with Harrison Cole, his lawyer and longtime friend, ensuring every detail was properly documented. "I'm not going to live forever, Grace," he'd said one autumn evening as we worked together on a rocking chair for my apartment. I was 28 then, and the comment had seemed unnecessarily morbid. "When I'm gone, I want to make sure you and your mother are protected. The company, the house, everything I've built, it's all for you two." 6 years later, pancreatic cancer would claim him in just 4 months from diagnosis to funeral. Those final weeks, as I watched this mountain of a man fade to shadow, he made me promise something that seemed strange at the time. "There's a sealed envelope in Harrison's office," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the hum of hospital machinery. "Don't open it unless someone tries to take what's yours. Promise me, Grace." I promised, thinking it was the morphine talking. Dad had always been protective, but this seemed like paranoia. Mom and I were his only family. Who would try to take anything from us? I couldn't have imagined then that the threat would come from within. Wearing the mask of comfort and companionship, I couldn't have known that grief would make my mother vulnerable to a predator who saw our loss as his opportunity. But Dad knew. Somehow, in his meticulous way, Richard Miller had prepared for a betrayal he hoped would never come, laying a foundation that would protect his legacy even from those who claimed to be family. The seeds of war had been planted in documents filed years before the enemy even appeared on our doorstep. The first time I met Steve Harland, he was holding my mother's hand at a grief support group meeting. It was 8 months after Dad's funeral, and I'd finally convinced Mom to seek help for the depression that had swallowed her whole. She'd lost 30 pounds, stopped tending her garden, and some days didn't even get out of bed. I was desperate to see any sign of the vibrant woman who used to organize charity galas and lead her book club with infectious enthusiasm. Steve was 55, with silver hair that looked professionally styled and clothes that suggested careful attention to appearance, pressed khakis, a polo shirt with no logo, boat shoes that had never seen a boat. He introduced himself as a widower who'd lost his wife 2 years prior. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced, and something in his pale blue eyes made my skin crawl, though I dismissed it as protective instinct. "Your mother's been such a comfort to me," he said, still holding Mom's hand. "We understand each other's pain." Mom looked at him with the first genuine smile I'd seen in months. Who was I to question anything that brought her back to life? At first, Steve seemed like a godsend. He brought groceries, cooked meals, got Mom laughing again. He'd show up with old movies and fresh flowers, coaxing her out for walks in Washington Park. I was grateful, overwhelmed with my own grief and the demands of work, thankful that someone could reach Mom in ways I couldn't. The changes were subtle at first. Steve started staying for dinner, then staying overnight. Within 3 months, he'd all but moved in. His suggestions became decisions. "Linda doesn't need to worry about the house maintenance," he'd tell me. "I've got it handled." When I mentioned Dad's trusted handyman had always done our repairs, Steve's jaw tightened. "That won't be necessary anymore." Then came his children. Dylan, 32, showed up one weekend with a U-Haul, claiming he needed to crash for a few weeks after a breakup. Weeks turned to months. He was loud, entitled, treating our home like a hotel. Sophie, 29, arrived next, supposedly visiting from California but never mentioning a return date. She immediately started redecorating, moving Dad's photos to the basement, replacing them with what she called less depressing art. The first time Steve mentioned the company, we were sitting at the dinner table, the same oak table Dad had built with his own hands. Dylan was complaining about his job at a gym. Sophie was scrolling through her phone, and Mom was serving a casserole Steve had insisted she make. "You know, Grace," Steve said, cutting his meat with precise movements. "Miller Restoration Group could use some fresh perspective. I've been in business myself, sales, mainly, and I see so much potential being wasted." "The company's doing fine," I replied carefully. "Dad's foreman, Marcus, has been running operations beautifully." Steve's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But it could be doing better. Sometimes an outsider's view is exactly what a family business needs. After all," he reached over to pat Mom's hand, "we're all family now, aren't we?" The word family from his mouth felt like theft. Over the following weeks, Steve's interest in the company became an obsession. He'd corner me with questions about profits, contracts, employee salaries. He started showing up at the office, introducing himself as Linda's partner, and asking for financial records. Marcus called me, concerned. "Who is this guy? Grace, he's making everyone uncomfortable." When I confronted Mom, she looked at me with disappointment. "Steve's just trying to help, sweetheart. He has experience. Your father would want the business to thrive." "Dad's business is thriving," I shot back. "It doesn't need Steve's help." "Our business," Steve corrected, appearing in the doorway. He'd been listening. "When you marry someone, you share everything. Isn't that right? Linda." "Mary." I looked at Mom, who was studying her hands. On her finger sat a diamond ring I'd never seen before. "You're engaged." My voice sounded hollow. "We were going to tell you properly," Mom said softly. "Steve proposed last week." I watched this stranger, this interloper, put his arm around my mother's shoulders, claiming her the way he was trying to claim everything else my father had built. Dylan appeared behind them, smirking. Sophie drifted in, already eyeing the grandmother clock in the hallway like an appraiser. "Congratulations," I managed, but inside, every alarm bell my father had installed in my intuition was screaming. That night, I called Harrison Cole. "I think I need to know what's in that envelope," I said. His pause was telling. "Come by tomorrow, Grace, and come alone." I came home from Harrison's office to find Dad's workshop torn apart. The barn doors stood wide open, November wind scattering sawdust across the yard like ashes. Inside, Steve directed Dylan and 2 hired movers as they loaded Dad's tools into a rental truck. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, my voice cracking with rage. Steve turned slowly, casually, as if he'd been expecting me. "Cleaning out old junk. Your mother agreed it's time to move forward." Junk. I stared at Dad's workbench, now bare, the hand planes he'd collected for 40 years, the chisels his grandfather had brought from Germany, the custom jigs he'd built for specific projects. Everything was being boxed and hauled away. "These are antique tools, some worth thousands of dollars." Dylan laughed, flexing his muscles as he lifted a box. "Yeah, exactly. Guy at the gym offered me good money for vintage stuff. Gonna upgrade my CrossFit equipment." I lunged for the box, but Steve stepped between us. "Grace, you're being emotional. Your mother wants this space converted into a proper garage. These old things are just gathering dust." Mom would never. I would never what. Mom appeared in the doorway, her face drawn. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mom, this is Dad's workshop. Everything he built, everything he taught me, happened here." "Your father is gone, Grace." Her voice was flat, rehearsed. "Steve thinks it's unhealthy to keep shrines to the dead." Shrines. I looked at the woman who'd kept Dad's coffee mug in the exact spot he'd left it, who still bought his favorite brand of cereal. This wasn't her talking. "Linda's right," Steve said, his hand on her shoulder like a puppeteer's. "Besides, as the man of the house now, I need proper garage space." That night, I discovered Sophie had been busy too. The dining room had been modernized. Dad's handcrafted oak wainscoting had been ripped out, replaced with stark white drywall. The built-in cabinets he'd made for Mom's china, gone. In their place stood some glass monstrosity from a furniture store. "Isn't it fabulous?" Sophie chirped, taking photos for her Instagram. "So much brighter. That old wood was so oppressive." "That old wood was reclaimed from a 19th century schoolhouse," I said through gritted teeth. "Dad spent 6 months restoring those panels." She shrugged. "Well, it was ugly. Steve agreed we needed to update if we're going to sell." Sell, the word hit me like ice water. Steve appeared. He had a talent for materializing whenever conflict arose. "Just thinking ahead. This house is too big for your mother and me, and with the company doing so well, we could invest the profits from both sales into something really special." "The company isn't for sale." His smile was patient, condescending. "Everything's for sale at the right price. Grace, your father understood business. I'm sure he'd want what's best for Linda's future." "You didn't know my father." "No," he agreed, his eyes cold. "But I know your mother, and as her soon-to-be husband, I know what she needs: financial security, a fresh start, freedom from the past." Mom stood silent beside him, a ghost of herself. The next morning, I arrived early to find Steve in Dad's home office, going through files. Legal documents were spread across the desk. Deeds, contracts, bank statements. "Those are private," I said. "Family business," he replied without looking up. "Linda asked me to get our affairs in order. We're thinking of adding my name to the company paperwork and the house deed, for legal protection, you understand." "Over my dead body." He finally looked at me, and for the first time, the mask slipped completely. "That could be arranged, though I'd prefer less dramatic solutions. You could simply sign over your interests. I'm prepared to be generous. Let you keep your job at North Star. Even give you a small payout. Everyone wins." "Get out of my father's office." "Your mother's office now, and soon, mine." He stood, straightening papers with deliberate calm. "You know, Grace, your mother's quite fragile. The stress of family conflict could push her back into that dark place. You wouldn't want to be responsible for that, would you? The threat was clear: comply, or he'd weaponize Mom's grief against me. That evening, I heard Mom crying in her bedroom. When I knocked, Steve answered, blocking the doorway. "She's upset," he said. "You're making this transition harder than it needs to be. I want to talk to my mother. She doesn't want to see you right now. You've upset her with your selfishness." From inside, I heard Mom's voice, small and broken. "Please, Grace, just do what Steve asks." I left the house that night and didn't come back, but I wasn't retreating. I was preparing for war. The envelope Harrison had given me contained everything I needed. Dad hadn't just seen this coming. He'd built a fortress of legal documentation that would make Steve's assault on our family legacy impossible. The house might have become a battlefield, but I held the high ground. Harrison Cole's office hadn't changed in 20 years. The same leather chairs, the same mahogany desk, the same photo of him and Dad on a fishing trip to Montana. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, Macallan 18, Dad's favorite, and slid the sealed envelope across the desk. "Your father sat in that exact chair 5 years ago," Harrison said, his weathered face grave. "He'd just met Steve at some contractors' convention. Came straight here after. 5 years ago, but Steve only appeared after Dad died." "That's what Steve wanted you to think." Harrison leaned back. "Richard did his homework. Steve Harland has a pattern. 3 widows in 12 years, all with substantial assets, never prosecuted, but always walking away richer." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside were documents that took my breath away. The first was a deed transfer, executed 3 years ago, placing Miller Restoration Group entirely in my name, not Mom's, not joint ownership, mine alone. The second was a trust document, moving the house and all other assets into an irrevocable trust with me as sole beneficiary. Mom retained lifetime residency rights, but couldn't sell, transfer, or encumber the property. How is this possible? Mom would have had to sign. She did. Richard told her it was for tax purposes, estate planning. She trusted him completely. Harrison pulled out another folder. "There's more. Your father hired a private investigator. Steve's first wife died in a car accident. Brake failure. Never properly investigated. His second wife overdosed on sleeping pills after changing her will. The third had a heart attack after signing over her business interests." I felt sick. "You're saying I'm saying patterns exist. Your father saw them." Harrison handed me another document. "This is the master stroke, a poison pill clause in the company charter. Any attempt to force a sale or transfer without your explicit consent triggers an immediate dissolution of assets to a designated charity. Steve could sue, manipulate, even marry your mother, but he can't touch the company without destroying its value completely." Dad thought of everything. "Not everything." Harrison's expression darkened. "He didn't anticipate Steve would turn your mother against you. Richard assumed Linda would see through him eventually. The emotional manipulation, the isolation tactics. Your father couldn't protect against those." I studied the papers, understanding dawning. Steve doesn't know about any of this. "No. The deed transfers were recorded in a different county. The trust documents are sealed. As far as public records show, everything still appears to be in your parents' joint names. So when Steve tries to take control, he'll hit a legal wall that'll knock him flat." Harrison smiled grimly. "But Grace, this protection comes with a cost. When Steve discovers the truth, he'll escalate. Men like him don't accept defeat gracefully." "What do you recommend?" "Let him make his move. Document everything. When he files paperwork trying to claim assets that don't exist, we'll have fraud charges. But be careful. Cornered predators are dangerous." I spent the next hour reviewing everything. Dad had been thorough beyond belief. Every asset cataloged, every transfer bulletproof, every contingency planned. There were even provisions preventing Mom from being manipulated into debt that could affect the estate. "There's one more thing," Harrison said as I prepared to leave. He handed me a sealed letter marked with my name in Dad's handwriting. "Richard asked me to give you this when you opened the main envelope." I read it in my car. tears streaming down my face. My dearest Grace, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have materialized. I'm sorry I couldn't protect your mother myself, but I trust you to be stronger than both of us. Steve Harland is a parasite who feeds on grief. I met him once, heard his stories, saw how he studied successful widows at that convention. I knew then he'd marked us. The workshop he destroyed. I built a duplicate in the storage unit on Alameda, Unit 47. Everything that matters is there, waiting for you. The company was always meant to be yours. Your mother knows this in her heart, even if grief clouds her judgment now. Be patient with her. Steve's hold will break when his true nature reveals itself. Don't let anger consume you, but don't let sentiment weaken you either. Use the law as your sword, and the truth as your shield. Harrison will guide you, but the strength must come from within. Remember what I taught you about restoration. Sometimes you must strip everything down to the foundation before you can rebuild. This applies to families too. All my love and faith. Dad. P.S. Check the foundation of the workshop's north wall. Third stone from the corner. You'll know what to do. I drove to the storage unit that night. Behind the roll-up door was Dad's workshop. Perfectly recreated. Every tool in its place. Even his coffee-stained notebooks. On the workbench sat an unfinished rocking chair, the sister to the one we'd built together. In my hands, I held more than legal documents. I held my father's foresight, his protection reaching from beyond the grave. Steve thought he was playing chess with a grieving daughter. He had no idea he was actually playing against Richard Miller, the man who'd spent 5 years setting up the board. The lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered to my office at North Star Technologies by a process server who looked apologetic. My coworkers stared as I signed for the thick envelope, whispers already starting before I'd closed my office door. Harland v. Miller petition for equitable distribution and breach of fiduciary duty. Steve wasn't just suing me, he was going for complete annihilation. The complaint alleged I'd manipulated my father into excluding my mother from the estate, that I'd mismanaged company funds, and that I was denying my mother her rightful inheritance. He demanded 60% of Miller Restoration Group, claiming sweat equity for his contributions to operational improvements. What contributions? Showing up uninvited to harass employees. My phone rang immediately. Mom. Grace, honey. Steve's only trying to protect me, she said, her voice mechanical. If you just agree to his terms, this can all go away. He's not asking for everything, just his fair share. His fair share of what? Dad's company that he never worked for, the house Dad built with his own hands. Steve says you've been hiding assets, that there are accounts I don't know about. Mom, do you hear yourself? You're accusing me of stealing from you. A pause, then quieter. Steve says, I don't care what Steve says. I exploded. What do you say? Mom, do you think I'm a thief? The line went silent. Then I heard Steve's voice in the background, coaching her. She needs to understand we're serious. Linda, tell her about the posts. The what? I asked. Sophie and Dylan have been sharing our story online, Mom continued, her voice strengthening with false conviction. About how you're destroying our family out of greed. The community deserves to know the truth. I opened Facebook with dread. There it was. Sophie's public post with 847 shares. My new stepmom's daughter is trying to steal everything from her own mother. She won't let her mom access her dead husband's business or bank accounts. Mom, Linda is heartbroken. Please share to expose Grace Miller's greed, family betrayal, elder abuse. The comments were brutal. People I'd known since childhood calling me heartless. Former classmates saying they always knew I was cold. Dylan had posted photos of Dad's empty workshop with captions about how I'd sold off family heirlooms for profit. Marcus called within the hour. Grace, we've got protesters outside the office. They're holding signs saying justice for Linda and shame on Grace. Local news just pulled up. Steve had weaponized social media against me, turning my community into his army. The first mediation session was scheduled for the following week. I arrived with Harrison to find Steve had brought not just one lawyer, but three. Mom sat between them like a prisoner, her hands folded, eyes downcast. Ms. Miller, Steve's lead attorney, a shark named Brennan, began immediately. My client is prepared to be generous, 60% of the company, 50% of liquid assets, and your mother retains the house. You walk away with 40%. More than fair considering you've contributed nothing to the business since your father's passing. I've contributed nothing. I laughed. I've been paying the bills, managing contracts, ensuring payroll. While denying the family access, Brennan interrupted. Your stepfather has tried repeatedly to help optimize operations. He's not my stepfather. He's not even married to my mother yet. A technicality that will be resolved next month, Steve interjected, his smile predatory. Linda and I are expediting our wedding. Then I'll have full spousal rights to protect her interests. Harrison leaned forward. Mr. Harland, what exactly are your qualifications for running a restoration company? I have 30 years of business experience. In what industry? Steve's jaw tightened. Various ventures, but business is business. I see. And these ventures, would those include the 3 previous widows you've been involved with? The room went cold. Brennan shifted uncomfortably. That's irrelevant and inflammatory. Is it? Harrison pulled out a folder. Patricia Harland, deceased 2011. Brake failure. Margaret Townsend, deceased 2015 overdose. Janet Coleridge, deceased 2019. Heart failure. All within 2 years of changing their wills in Mr. Harland's favor. Mom's head snapped up, a flicker of something, doubt, fear, crossing her face. Steve stood abruptly. This is harassment. We came here in good faith. You came here to steal, I said quietly. But you made one mistake, Steve. You assumed my father was as careless as you are calculating. Brennan gathered his papers. If you won't negotiate reasonably, we'll let the court decide. And Ms. Miller. He looked at me with practiced disdain. Public opinion matters in this town. Your reputation won't survive what's coming. After they left, Harrison touched my shoulder. You did well. Let them file their motions. The more aggressive they get, the worse it looks when the truth comes out. But that night, alone in my apartment, scrolling through hundreds of hateful comments from people who'd known me my whole life, I wondered if winning legally would matter if I lost everything else. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Drop the attitude or things get worse. You haven't seen anything yet. S. Then another. From Mom. Please, Grace, just give him what he wants. I'm begging you. I pulled out Dad's letter, reading his words again. Use the law as your sword, and the truth as your shield. The battle was escalating, but I wouldn't yield. Not when I knew what was coming. Not when Dad had made sure I held all the cards. Steve wanted war. He was about to learn why Richard Miller's daughter never lost a fight that mattered. Harrison and I spent 3 weeks building our counteroffensive. Every harassing text from Steve, screenshotted and documented. Every social media lie from Sophie and Dylan, archived with timestamps. The security footage from Miller Restoration Group showing Steve trying to access locked filing cabinets, saved and backed up. We need more, I told Harrison. Something that shows the pattern. That's when Marcus called. Grace, you need to see this. Dylan's been coming to the warehouse at night. The security footage was damning. Dylan, using a key he'd somehow obtained, loading Dad's vintage tools, the ones supposedly sold already, into his truck. But these weren't from the workshop. These were from our climate-controlled storage, where we kept restoration equipment worth hundreds of thousands. He's been selling our specialized equipment on eBay. Marcus showed me the listings, using fake accounts, but I recognized the serial numbers. Then came the gift from an unexpected source. Janet Coleridge's daughter, Emma, reached out after seeing the social media posts. I know what Steve Harland is, she said over coffee, her hands shaking. He isolated my mother, turned her against us, Convinced her we were after her money. By the time Mom died, she'd changed her will 3 times, each version giving Steve more. We couldn't prove manipulation, but she handed me a flash drive. Mom kept recordings. She was getting paranoid near the end. Recorded everything, including Steve coaching her on what to say to lawyers. The recordings were chilling. Steve's voice, patient and poisonous. Tell them your children never visit. Say they only call when they need money. Cry if you have to. Janet, remember, I'm the only one who really loves you. The courtroom was packed for the hearing. Steve had ensured media attention, thinking public pressure would break me. He sat confidently beside his legal team. Mom next to him in a new dress he'd obviously chosen, expensive but aging her, making her look frail and victimized. Your Honor, Brennan began, my client seeks only to protect his fiancé's interests from a daughter who has systematically excluded her mother from her rightful inheritance. Judge Martinez, thankfully, was known for her no-nonsense approach. Present your evidence, counselor. They presented their case, my refusal to share financial information, the emotional distress I'd caused my mother, Steve's attempts to help being rebuffed. They painted me as a calculating daughter who'd manipulated her dying father. Then it was our turn. Harrison started with the security footage. Your Honor, Mr. Harlan's son has been stealing from Miller Restoration Group. The courtroom gasped as Dylan's face appeared on screen, clearly loading equipment. Furthermore, Harrison continued, Mr. Harland himself has been attempting to access confidential files without authorization. More footage. Steve trying different keys on locked cabinets, photographing documents with his phone. Brennan objected frantically. This is character assassination. This is evidence of theft and corporate espionage, Harrison countered. He pulled out his next weapon. Your Honor, we'd like to present evidence of Mr. Harlan's pattern of behavior with previous partners. Steve's face went white as Emma Coleridge took the stand. Her testimony was devastating. Then Harrison played the recordings. Steve's voice filled the courtroom, manipulating a dying woman. Mom's face crumbled as she heard the exact phrases Steve had used on her. Tell them Grace doesn't understand your grief. Linda, say she's too focused on money to see your pain. The judge called a recess, in the hallway. Mom approached me for the first time in weeks, Steve trailing behind. Those recordings, she whispered. Mom, he's using you, just like he used them. Steve grabbed her arm. Linda, she's manipulating you. Don't fall for... Don't touch her. I stepped between them. His mask finally slipped completely. You little bitch. You think you've won? I'll destroy you. Your reputation, your career, everything. Steve, Mom's voice was small but clear. Let go of my arm. The courtroom reconvened with a different energy. Mom had moved to sit behind me, not Steve. Your Honor, Harrison stood. Before we proceed, there's one more matter. The assets Mr. Harland seeks to claim, they don't exist in the form he believes. This was it, the moment Dad had prepared for. Harrison presented the deed transfers, the trust documents, the ironclad legal framework Dad had built. Miller Restoration Group has been solely owned by Grace Miller for 3 years. The house is held in an irrevocable trust. Mr. Harland is suing for assets that were never available to him. Brennan fumbled through papers. This can't be legal. Linda Miller must have been coerced. I wasn't coerced. Mom stood up, her voice stronger than I'd heard in 2 years. I signed those papers willingly. Richard explained everything. I just forgot. She looked at Steve with dawning horror. Or was convinced to forget. Judge Martinez had seen enough. Mr. Harland, Mr. Brennan, I'm seeing evidence of theft, fraud, and attempted manipulation of a vulnerable widow. I'm dismissing this case with prejudice and recommending criminal investigation. Steve erupted. This is rigged, that bitch. Mr. Harland. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. One more word and you'll be held in contempt. Dylan tried to flee but was stopped by courthouse security. Sophie was frantically deleting her social media posts on her phone. Steve stood frozen, his carefully constructed plan in ruins. "Grace," he hissed as court officers approached him about the theft charges. "This isn't over." "Yes," I said quietly, thinking of Dad's letter. "It is." As Steve was escorted out for questioning, Mom collapsed against me, sobbing. "I'm so sorry, Grace. I'm so sorry." "I know. Mom, it's okay. You're safe now." But even as I held her, watching Steve's empire of manipulation crumble, I knew there would be one final confrontation. Men like Steve didn't accept defeat. The real ending was yet to come. The courthouse steps were swarming with reporters. The same local news that had painted me as a villain now thrust microphones in my face, hungry for the story's reversal. I pushed through them without a word, my arm around Mom's shoulders as she trembled against me. Behind us, the scene was chaos. Dylan was in handcuffs, screaming about entrapment while Sophie sobbed dramatically for the cameras, playing victim even now. Steve maintained his composure until the doors closed. Then we could hear his muffled rage echoing through the building. "Grace Mrs. Miller, how does it feel to expose Steve Harlan's scheme? Will you be pressing additional charges? Linda, how did he manipulate you?" We said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be twisted, edited, packaged for consumption. The truth had been spoken in court. Everything else was noise. In the parking lot, Mom stopped walking. She stood there, looking lost, as if she'd suddenly woken from a 2-year nightmare and didn't recognize the world anymore. "The house," she whispered. "I can't go back there. His things. Their things." "We'll get a hotel," I said. "Harrison can arrange to have them removed." "No," her voice cracked. "I need to see it. I need to face what I let happen." The drive home was silent. Mom stared out the window, occasionally wiping tears that wouldn't stop falling. When we pulled into the driveway, she gasped. Neighbors had gathered, not with protest signs this time, but standing quietly, witnessing. Mrs. Patterson from next door stepped forward. "Linda, we're so sorry. We should have seen, should have helped." Mom just nodded, unable to speak. Inside, the house was a battlefield of Steve's failed conquest. His belongings scattered everywhere, Dylan's gym equipment in Dad's study, Sophie's gaudy art covering our family photos. Mom walked through it like a ghost surveying ruins. In the kitchen, she found the wedding planning book Steve had left open on the counter. Venues circled, dates highlighted. Next month. He'd been so sure of victory, he'd already booked the country club. "He told me it would be a fresh start," she said hollowly, "that marrying him would honor your father's memory by moving forward." She picked up a photo Sophie had knocked over. Dad and Mom on their own wedding day, 35 years ago. The glass was cracked. "Richard warned me," she continued. "Not about Steve specifically, but he told me I might be vulnerable after he was gone, that grief makes people do things they'd never normally do. I thought I was stronger than that. Mom, he's a professional predator. This is what he does." "I know." She turned to me, eyes blazing with self-hatred. "Don't you think I know that now I let him into our home? I stood by while he destroyed your father's workshop. I took his side against my own daughter. I almost gave him everything Richard worked for." She collapsed at the kitchen table, the one Dad built, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. I held her as she broke apart completely, mourning not just Dad all over again, but the woman she'd been before grief made her vulnerable. "I signed their prenup," she gasped between sobs. "Steve had me sign it last week, giving him rights to half of everything if we divorced. How could I be so stupid? That prenup is worthless. Mom, he has no claim to anything." "But I do." She looked up at me, mascara streaming. "I have claims to your forgiveness, and I don't deserve it." Before I could respond, my phone rang. "Harrison?" "Grace, problem. Steve made bail, and he's already violated the restraining order. My contact at the bank says he tried to access your mother's accounts an hour ago. Police are looking for him." As I hung up, we heard it. the front door slamming open. Steve stood there, no longer the polished manipulator but something raw and desperate. His shirt was untucked, his carefully styled hair wild. Behind him, the neighbors backed away, someone calling 911. Linda. He pushed past me, grabbing Mom's hands. Baby, don't let them poison you against me. We have something special. I love you. Mom jerked away. You love my money, my house, my husband's company. That's not true, Linda. Please. Get out, I said, stepping between them. His facade cracked completely. You fucking bitch. You ruined everything. Everything. 3 years I planned this. 3 years of playing nice, of pretending to care about her pathetic grief. Mom's slap echoed through the kitchen. Steve staggered, hand to his cheek, staring at her in shock. My grief, she said quietly, was for a man worth 1,000 of you. Police sirens wailed closer. Steve looked between us, calculating, then rushed for the back door. He made it 3 steps before Marcus and 2 of Dad's construction crew blocked his path. They'd been waiting outside, called by Harrison. Going somewhere? Marcus asked, crossing his massive arms. Steve spun back to us, cornered, desperate. This isn't over. I'll sue for defamation, for false imprisonment, for what? Harrison appeared in the doorway with 2 police officers. Mr. Harland, you're in violation of a restraining order and wanted for questioning regarding theft and fraud. As the officers cuffed him, Steve looked at me one last time. Your father would be ashamed of you. My father, I said clearly, saw you coming from 3 years away. They dragged him out as the neighbors watched, some filming on their phones. The same social media that had crucified me would now witness his fall. Dylan was arrested at the gym. Sophie fled to California but was picked up at LAX trying to board a flight to Mexico with $50,000 in cash, money traced to the sale of our stolen equipment. Mom and I stood in the wreckage of our kitchen, surrounded by the debris of Steve's occupation. Outside, the neighbors began to disperse, the show over, but for us, the real work was just beginning. Can you ever forgive me? Mom whispered. I thought of Dad's letter, be patient with her. There's nothing to forgive, I said. He was a parasite. They're designed to not be detected until it's too late. But I chose him over you. No, Mom. Grief chose him. You were just trying to survive. We held each other in the kitchen Dad built, in the house he protected. Surrounded by the legacy he'd made sure would survive even this, the war was over. But the restoration of trust, of family, of home, would take time. Outside, the sun was setting over the Rockies, painting the sky the color of hope and ending, beginning and farewell. Tomorrow, we would start rebuilding. 6 months later, I stood in the rebuilt workshop, running my hand along the restored workbench. Marcus and his crew had worked weekends to recreate Dad's space exactly as it had been, using photos and measurements from the secret storage unit. Every tool hung in its prescribed place. Even the coffee stain on the corner of the bench had been lovingly replicated. Miller Restoration Group was thriving again, with Steve's toxicity removed and Mom's blessing. I'd officially taken the helm. We'd just landed the contract to restore the historic Brown Palace Hotel downtown, a project Dad had dreamed of for years. The morning news had run a feature on us, local company rises from family betrayal to land historic contract. The best part, I'd hired back all of Dad's original crew, plus some new faces, including Emma Coleridge, who turned out to have a gift for detail work. She said working here helped her heal from what Steve had done to her mother. We understood each other in ways that didn't need words. Steve was serving 5 years for fraud and theft. His lawyer had tried to plea bargain, but the prosecutor had recordings of him admitting to the previous schemes. Courtesy of Emma's mother's paranoia, Dylan got 18 months in probation. Sophie received community service and restitution orders that would take her a decade to pay off. Their social media accounts, once weapons against me, had been deleted in disgrace. But the real restoration wasn't in the workshop or the company, it was in the kitchen, where Mom was teaching me Dad's secret recipe for Sunday roast. She'd started seeing a therapist, working through not just the grief of losing Dad, but the trauma of Steve's manipulation. Some days were harder than others, but she was finding her way back to herself. "I remembered something," she said, seasoning the meat. "The day your father had me sign those papers, the trust documents, he said something odd. He said, 'Linda, I'm giving Grace the tools to protect you both.' I didn't understand then. 'He knew you'd need time to grieve,' I said. 'He just wanted to make sure you had that time safely.'" She nodded, tears threatening but not falling. "I went to his grave yesterday, told him everything, apologized for being so weak." "You weren't weak, Mom. You were human." That evening, we hosted our first family dinner since before Steve. Just us. Marcus and his wife, Harrison, and a few of Dad's oldest friends. The house felt alive again, filled with laughter instead of tension. Dad's photos were back on the walls, his chair at the head of the table empty but somehow still present. After dinner, I slipped away to the workshop. There was one last thing Dad had mentioned in his letter, the third stone from the corner of the north wall foundation. I'd been afraid to look, afraid of what final message might be waiting. The stone was loose, as I'd expected. Behind it was a small metal box, weatherproofed and sealed. Inside was another letter and a key. "Grace, if you're reading this, you've won the war I hoped would never come." The key opens a safety deposit box at First National, Box 1247. Inside is something I've been saving for your wedding day, but more importantly, there's a photo album. Pictures of every project we did together, every lesson I taught you, every moment that mattered. But here's the real secret: the victory was never about the money or the company. It was about proving that love, real love, builds foundations that no parasite can destroy. You are my greatest restoration project. Grace, not because you needed fixing, but because you were built to last. Keep building, keep restoring, keep protecting what matters. And remember, that rocking chair in the storage unit? Finish it. Your mother will need something beautiful to hold on to. Forever your proud father, Richard. I spent the next 3 months finishing that chair in evening sessions. Mom often sitting with me, learning the techniques Dad had taught me. When it was done, we placed it in the living room where his chair used to be. Different, but honoring the same space. The day we unveiled the Brown Palace Hotel restoration, the whole city seemed to celebrate with us. The mayor spoke about resilience, about Denver values, about businesses that survived attempts to tear them down. But I barely heard him. I was watching Mom in the crowd, standing tall, wearing Dad's company pin on her lapel. "You did it, Grace," Harrison said beside me. "Richard would be so proud." "We did it," I corrected, thinking of everyone who'd stood by us. Dad always said restoration was never a solo job. That night, I found Mom in the workshop, running her hands over the tools, breathing in the scent of sawdust and possibilities. "I understand now," she said, "why he loved it here. It's not about the past. It's about taking something damaged and making it whole again, making it better. That's what we did. Mom, we restored us." She smiled, really smiled, for the first time since Dad died. "No, sweetheart, we didn't just restore, we rebuilt stronger." As we locked up the workshop, I touched the cornerstone where Dad's final secret had waited. Steve had tried to steal our foundation, but he'd never understood the truth. Real foundations aren't made of money or property or companies. They're made of love, trust, and the unbreakable bonds between people who choose to build something together. And those can weather any storm, survive any attack, and emerge stronger for having been tested. Dad knew that. He'd built his whole life on it. And now, finally, we were home. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect with others who've experienced family challenges and triumphs. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if this story resonated with you. And please share your own thoughts and experiences. Your stories matter too, and this community is here to listen.